to do is introduce Ammaarah Martinus, who's one of the co-presidents of Bescy, to talk a little bit about our efforts overall as they relate to the Global South and kind of where we're heading with plans and efforts and commitments. So Ammaarah, would you like to jump in and go from there?
Sure. Thank you so much, Scott, and thanks for having me. And also, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everybody on the call. I'm really excited to see 74 of you on the call. So, and I'm sure that today's panel is going to be quite a good one. And looking forward to hearing a bit more. So as Scott said, I'm Ammaarah Martinus. I'm the co-president of Bescy. And also having worked within the Global South for quite a few years, both in Africa. I'm based in South Africa and also in Asia. So really excited to tell you a little bit more about what we are doing as Bescy, particularly as we transition from the Action Design Network, as Scott said, to Bescy. And really thinking about how we bring in everybody, both from the North and the South, together to be able to talk more and to practice more in the field of behavioral science. So today, I really wanted to share with you a little bit more about a new special interest group that we will be launching here at Bescy. And it really speaks to some of the things that we've been wanting to encapsulate under the banner of Bescy. So for context, part of the reason why I joined Bescy as an organization was to work on how we could really grow what we are doing within the banner of Bescy, but really linking that and growing a Global South network. And so Scott really was very sort of gracious to ask me to come and say a few words about the new group. So thank you again, Scott, for that. And really, as I said, the transformation of Bescy is really thinking about how we can grow our influence and our network within the Global South, and particularly looking at ways of linking with Global South and Global North. So really what we wanted to do as an organization is to see how we could operate based on our new Bescy mission and values, and link that to this new group. So in order to do this, what we thought is that the Global South group really needs to include a couple of things. The first thing is focused primarily on building an inclusive community, and also building collaboration through actively promoting events that have diverse participation. And I'm glad to see a few of you from all over the world joining today. So whether you're sitting in Africa, whether you're sitting in the Latin American region, Middle East, or Asia, you would all be able to be involved in a group such as this. I think the second important pillar for us is really promoting equity. And so this really talks about how do we ensure that our events and our webinars such as this get as many people to come as possible, and to attend, importantly, across time zones. So for example, if we have people joining from Asia, how do we actually make sure that our time zones and our events are actually planned at a decent time for most people? And then our third principle is really about driving work that is ethical and for good, and really ensuring that we are taking into account and into consideration those local cultural context, which of course needs nuance and is important as we sort of think about working within the Global South. And I think as behavioral science as a field, promoting the evidence base is almost part and parcel of what we do as behavioral scientists or aspiring behavioral scientists. And so it is very key for us to make sure that while we are looking at the rigor of what we put out there in terms of our outputs, it's equally as important to realize and acknowledge that sometimes working in the Global South doesn't always have a journal article published. It might be gray literature that doesn't see the light of day just because we don't always have the time to be able to write journal articles, go through a rigorous process and actually get things published. And so part of the idea of the Global South group is to ensure that those voices get heard and that we look at enhancing what comes out of it. So some of the topics that we'll be looking at is really thinking about anything ranging from education, sustainability, healthcare, to be able to have as diverse an audience as possible, but really making sure that whatever we are talking about in the Global South is is relevant and is important for those working and living with in those regions. Our target audience for this particular group is aimed at anyone doing work in the Global South. So whether you are in the private sector, academia, NGOs, or even government, it's important for us to really make sure that, again, this diverse group and audience actually comes into play. So a little bit about the group itself and when it will be launched. We are hoping and aiming for a launch in the middle of May of this year. We will be providing more details on our social media platforms, as well as writing to our network of Bescy people who have come to our events before. So please do watch this space and join us. And I think as we start to grow this group and we co-create its shape as well as its form, we want to do this with and for those in the Global South. And I think this is one of the core things coming out of my work here and those that will be joining me along this journey. So with that, Scott, I will leave it. And thank you so much again for having me, and all the best with the panel.
Thank you so much, Mara. A lot of really important themes there, some of which I'm sure are going to come up over the course of today's panel. And I think one that definitely resonated with me was the message you just made about co-creation. This is a nonprofit organization that's really here to serve the needs of the members. So you'll see we'll drop a few questions in actually about some of the things that you'd be interested in, and we love to use today and follow up as a way to hear from you what's important to you and what would be valuable to you and what we can do, and that'll help shape things. So with that said, let's turn to our distinguished panel. And what I would say is, rather than me doing some awkward bios, I think it might be best to ask Pooja and Miguel to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about where they're coming from. But I do have one kind of question to link to that, I think, which is just the whole terminology of Global South. I know perhaps there's some sensitivity around that in just the very terminology we're grouping together, literally billions of people from very diverse environments and situations and backgrounds and so forth. So I was curious, as you introduce yourself, maybe to talk a little bit about your region and maybe what you feel could be unique or very specific to the region, as opposed to perhaps where there may be some commonalities with respect to other regions or this notion of a Global South, if that makes sense. Pooja, are you okay to start us off?
Sure, happy to. So firstly, thanks for having me on this panel. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. A little about me. I'm a senior advisor at Center for Social and Behavior Change, which is a center based out of New Delhi, India. And the work that the center does is both research in the area of behavior science specific to India, but also work on real life applications across many sectors like health, education, climate, financial inclusion, and so on. So I was the part of the team that set up the center, and also led the team which actually set up the first nudge unit within the Indian government, and that was about 5 years back, a big accomplishment for us. Before that, actually, I spent almost 10 or 12 years in management consulting with McKinsey, where also my work included a lot working with companies on consumer insights. So that time it was not behavior science, it was more consumer insights. So this journey has been going and changing form for almost 25 years now. The question that you asked very specifically, I mean, of course, I could spend a long time talking about what is different about India. And also, it's hard to talk about India as well as just one monolith. But a couple of things I would say is that, yes, the term Global South is something which I know it's used for convenience, but, for someone who's working in India, I mean, I'm actually going to look forward to what Miguel and, Francis have to say today, because sitting in India, actually, we have very little knowledge of what is happening, and we don't necessarily are looking at ourselves as a cohort. I think a couple of things in India which have come, and the biggest that actually is impacting the lot of work that we do is that India has digitized very quickly. We have almost 1.2 billion smartphone users, but the literacy rate, economic conditions are still lower than many of the other countries of Global South. So we have a very interesting situation where you have a large population, 1.2 billion people who are using smartphones, and every day that's increasing, but you're also working with that same population where literacy and means and financial resources are less. So a lot of our work has been very interesting, because how can you leverage digital technology, but in this resource-constrained environment? I think that's a very unique challenge that we have to work with in India. So I'll stop here and over to Miguel.
Well, thank you so much, Pooja. Well, my name is Miguel Rosales. I'm an interim principal advisor at the Behavioral Insights team. I've been with the organization for around 4.5 years, and first in our Washington, D.C. office, and now in Mexico City, where I'm originally from. And well, what's most relevant for this panel is that I currently lead our operations in Latin America, working in different areas such as public health, prevention of gender-based violence, financial inclusion, and also supporting the development of nudge units all around the region, and also evaluations in cities all over the Americas. Before joining BIT, I work in the Mexican federal government in a few different ministries. I also work at the World Bank and also in civil society in Mexico. And well, I'm delighted to be part of this panel. Thank you so much, Ammaarah, Grace, Scott, and everyone else involved in this event, because there are just a few opportunities to talk about behavioral science applied to these regions. So I'm especially grateful to have this conversation about this panel with these terrific participants. And also, well, thank you so much for you coming from all over the world and joining to this event. Regarding your question, Scott, about the Global South, as Pooja mentioned, I think it's a convenient term. I would not like to spend that much time talking about if it applies or not. I think, well, it's convenient, but I would like to more focus on my region. And my region is a very diverse one. For example, Brazil could be just a subcontinent by itself. But of course, we share some common elements, history, and two main languages in the region, but also similar challenges. So I think that it's an important thing that we need to highlight. Another one that I would like to highlight in terms of our region is that some countries within Latin America are considered middle income. So sometimes it's tricky in terms of funding or international cooperation. So that's another important thing that we need to consider. But yeah, I think it's also within the Global South. Latin America is another interesting, convenient term. But as I've mentioned, we share some common elements, but also there's a lot of diversity within the countries that are part of this region.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. And now kind of the moment of truth. I wanted to see if Francis is able to join us and speak. I know he was having some connection difficulties. So we'll see if Francis is able to join.
Hello, hi Scott. How are you? How's everyone? I hope you're all well. I hope you can hear me as well. Sorry for joining so late and for the technical difficulties, but very quickly, what I caught. My name is Francis Meyo. I'm CEO of Busara. Busara has existed for more than a decade. We pride ourselves in applying and advancing behavioral science in the Global South. We are evolving over time, given some of the discussions that have happened. And with the Global South tag, we're really moving towards a global majority tag and starting to think of which are the constituencies, wherever they're in the world, that may benefit from understanding some of the challenges they're facing from a behavioral lens perspective. So I think that's a significant step that we've started evolving over the last couple of months as well. And then for us at Busara, we also try and bring three worlds together. One is the behavioral science world, one is the development world, and then one is sort of this global majority world. And I think if we're able to do it in a way that results in a triple win, then we're really onto something. But speaking of behavioral science, I think given that behavioral science did evolve, at least for us, from the combination of cognitive psychology and economics, that kind of discipline known as behavioral economics, it's important to sort of appreciate that and see that evolution. We started the first decision lab in the Global South in Nairobi, right? But we've evolved to be more than that. So while we still do behavioral experiments in lab settings, how has that evolved into a really multidisciplinary approach of trying to understand, appreciate, and apply behavioral science, but also thinking of what are indigenous knowledge systems that may exist in some of the contexts in which we are trying to work and achieve the goals we set for ourselves. So let me stop there as a very quick introduction, and hopefully I think given some of the conversations we'll be having, I'll be able to share a little bit more. Thanks, Scott.
Great. Thank you, Francis. And yes, we can hear you with very minor and intermittent issues, but nothing that is really fundamentally getting in the way. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us and for your introductions. To kick things off, and I know you each touched on this in some way, shape, or form as you were speaking about your region, but I guess I'd love to just hear your perspectives on really the state of behavioral science in specific to your region or to the efforts that you're seeing, where you're seeing positive momentum and energy, perhaps, what kinds of trends are out there, perhaps in terms of the types of projects and issues and challenges, or maybe funding sources. And let's start there, and then maybe we can turn to challenges and changes in a moment. So Francis, are you okay to come back and maybe start us off on kind of where you see things? Do you see the glass half full or half empty in terms of momentum and energy and so forth?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. I'm on the half full side. I'm very optimistic at this point, especially given the elephant in the room, what's happening in development more broadly, what's happening with some of the issues core at the center of behavioral science, biases, ECC, and that are becoming banned words, if you will. And I think very positive in a way that the work or the impact that behavioral science is meant to have and has had is not done. So that's something that really excites me and re-energizes me to move it forward. I think there's an issue, what I've even before this moment of just upheaval in the development space, I think there's been a great evolution of behavioral science moving from the periphery in some of this work to being more centered. So in the past, some of the work we do would be centered around, from a partner, the questions would be, we're having issues around adoption, around utilization, right, around advocacy. And are you able to help us in that very limited way? And with partners that are very open and they can engage with freely, being able to learn those lessons and then center what could a very fundamental collaboration look like. And I'd like to offer an example right now. So on the African continent, the HIV pandemic has been quite a scourge, and different people have tried different ways of approaching it. And Busara was involved in trying to improve the uptake of these daily oral PrEP pills. That was great from our hard sciences community, and we rolled it out. Part of the strategy then was to roll it out to the populations that are most affected by the HIV scourge. And this ended up being female sex workers or women who have sex with men as a first step. And when we then tried rolling out to the rest of the population, there was a stigma attached to it, right? And people's identities felt that, no, this is a useful product, but it's not for me, it's for other people, right? So when that biomedical community came together again to develop the next sort of generation of HIV prevention products, it was great that they then worked in a very fundamental way with us as behavioral scientists to develop more inclusive and perhaps more impactful go-to-market strategies. necessarily think is coming to the forefront now, but even now, given the challenges within development and folks perhaps reducing some of the investments in structural interventions, I think it is the time for us as enthusiasts of human behavior and its role in development would step up. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Miguel or Pooja, would you like to speak to this? Either of you want to talk a little bit about how you see things and with respect to trends and glass half full or empty? Pooja, I saw your hand.
Just a couple of comments. So I agree with what Francis is saying. And in fact, in India, we are seeing huge momentum, not just from the government side, but also private sector. And I'll talk about the government. Like I mentioned, our center was instrumental in setting up the first nudge unit, which was within the central government. But this was then followed by two more state units which are set in the biggest states of India, and the teams are doing multiple projects right now. And then there are 6 more states which are setting up these behavioral insight units, as they're being called here. So from a government side, especially when it comes to applications in health and nutrition, which is where majority of the work right now is when it comes to behavior science, there is a huge amount of momentum. I think there is scope for broadening the applications with the government, and some of that has started with financial inclusion and education, but still the excitement around health and nutrition and application of behavior science is very high in the government. And we will talk about this later, so I won't spend too much time here. Of course, as I mentioned, India is getting digitized, so in the private sector, we are seeing large-scale application of behavior science in the digital businesses which have come up. So in both of those two cases, health and nutrition, the government, and then the digital private businesses especially, we are seeing a lot of energy and very positive momentum.
Great. I see a question from Danya, and I'll apologize in advance if I'm mispronouncing people's names. That is obviously not my intention. And the question is about in creating a nudge unit, because you spoke about that a second ago. Could you talk a little more about what steps were taken and how this was done, given perhaps political challenges or instability and some of the issues that might be more prevalent perhaps in the global South, although certainly not a monopoly on it by any means these days.
Right. So, I mean, again, we can spend a long time on this, but a few things. I mean, I think that we started with setting up the Behavioral Insights Unit at the central government, but I think very soon we realized that a lot of the work that needs to happen has to happen at the state level. So I think that's why the desire to go step by step and actually go at the state levels and set up these units. And most of these units are a combination of, there are special behavior scientists or researchers who are there. They are working with an implementation partner who basically have access to the target population, because usually the behavior scientists will not have the access. So there are always partners on the ground who have this, closely working with the government department. So in this case, for example, in UP, Uttar Pradesh, which is the biggest state in India, we're doing multiple projects on health. So we're working directly with the health ministry, their implementation partners who have feet on the ground, and then our center in that kind of a 3-partner kind of an arrangement. So we can, of course, talk about it later, but that's really that's the magic formula, where what we found, you need that academic rigor, but you also need that implementation ability, that quick implementation ability. And then, of course, this has to be done. The demand for the work has to come from the government. So all 3 have to work closely.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And Miguel, I see your hand up. Would you like to share your perspective on kind of the larger?
Really brief, Scott. Thanks so much. Well, in Latin America, what I've seen is a steady growth. It's not a uniform moment. Of course, it depends and varies from country to country. But what it's like very encouraging is that we are no longer starting from scratch. We actually, it's easy for us to find strong champions inside government or other institutions who understand and value behavioral science, and who are the ones that are looking to apply it to their institutions. That's an important thing. The other thing that it's also interesting is that governments and other institutions are increasingly embedding behavioral science into their structures. We have some very successful cases like in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, or Uruguay. And in terms of trends, I see like two main things or three main things. The first one is that our clients are demanding a more stronger focus on co-creation with local actors. So we are doing that a lot. And the second involves more like applying behavioral science beyond the usual domains. Right now, we are no longer applying behavioral science to, for example, tax compliance, which was an important thing when we were starting. Now we're seeing in other interesting areas such as violence prevention, climate adaptation, or civic engagement. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that we are seeing a growing attention to how we scale successful interventions in the region. So that will be like the main trends that I'm seeing right now.
That's great, that question of scaling and the challenge of scaling across the region. I know Francis mentioned kind of the elephant in the room, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you all a little bit more about your thoughts on, some of the political changes and upheaval, and how you see that in terms of affecting behavioral science in particular. Is there a silver lining to some of the reductions in aid and USAID and so forth? Is it an opportunity in some way, shape, or form, or is it just a very negative story? I didn't know if anyone had some thoughts that they might want to add there.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Maybe I can jump in. Hopefully my connection holds and before I get kicked out. But I wanted to comment on what Miguel and Pooja had been talking about previously around nudge units. And I would say I think there has been an increase in nudge units, not just in government, but even sort of multilateral organizations, right? USAID, to talk about it, I think they ended up setting up behavioral science units a few years back under President Obama. I think various UN agencies, UNICEF. And one thing I've been, drawn back by is for those agencies as well, even if it's housed internally, right, and they don't necessarily need individuals, organizations such as us who are represented here to help them move along, the impact still isn't what you'd expect, right? So what's happening? Is it that just setting up a nudge unit kind of resolves it, or is there something different within development that we kind of need to think about? And I'd like to connect it to the question you're asking now, which is, to me, given different political sort of challenges, and more specifically than with USAID, are we speaking about the same issue at times, but using different languages and using different sort of approaches and kind of a desire to see something else? Given behavioral science started from a research tradition, what then can we offer policymakers, right? And that's the connection, say, to nudge unit. What else can we offer practitioners? And that's connected to even multilateral institutions, UN agencies, where you see this divide between SBC folks and program folks as well. And so I may not have the full answers, but I think to me that really is the question, right? And you start moving towards it to say, what's your, imagine you're on a negotiating table, and what's your counterpart really looking out for, and what outcomes are they trying to get to? And then once you establish that common ground, you can sort of start navigating through it. But that's how I'd look at it at a high level. And I'll pause there. Thanks.
Thank you, Francis. Miguel or Pooja, I'm curious whether you'd want to react to Francis's comments there, or to the earlier question or issue that I raised about, the current or recent upheaval and its potential implications.
So, I mean, if you're talking about the upheaval in the US, for example, I mean, I think that here, we haven't yet seen any big impact of that in India. I think that's one kind of political upheaval, but I think there's also within India, we have to think about political upheaval or changes in government. And I think one of the ways that has worked in the past is if you work with the bureaucracy and get the bureaucrats on board, And in fact, you will, a lot of the work that we do is directly with that layer of the government as opposed to working with the parties or the politicians. And in fact, we do training for behavior science amongst all the new bureaucrats who join, the country as a way of like sensitizing them and making them excited about behavior science. So I think working with that layer ensures some level of continuity. Of course, for us, it's really good because in India, even at our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi has talked about the importance of behavior science when it comes to the Clean India mission that he launched. So there is, in general, a positive environment from the current government, but then also if governments change, the idea is to continue to work with bureaucrats as opposed to working with any party or any particular person.
Great, thank you, thank you. I see a question from Fatima that I think you've touched on, but maybe you'd have more to add, which was, is there a model or a process for institutionalizing behavioral science within public agencies that you think others across the global South should learn from or replicate? And I know you've been speaking to some of the strategies you've been using, but I didn't know if there was more that any of you would want to add with respect to this issue of institutionalizing behavioral science and perhaps making sure that it's lasting beyond a specific person or government, into another regime.
Perhaps I can begin very quickly. What I've seen work in some instance, and the approach typically is a capacity development approach where you go in, you're introducing behavioral science, introducing what it looks like, trying to prioritize what their challenges are, working through a very specific set of challenges, and then usually follows that you get them to try and do it on their own, and you kind of ease out of it. I think the biggest bit that has been missing and that we're trying to advocate for now is, for whatever challenge you're facing, how do you tie it to a larger income, a broader outcome rather, that folks should care about and that they can then apply in later settings, right? So if you are tackling malaria with the South Sudan Health Ministry, how do you, and through a behavioral design approach, for example, how do you do the capacity building in that sense, but then try and equip the technical folks within that ministry to then be able to deal with any other disease area, right? Because it's not that you'll solve malaria and then you come back and work with them to solve whatever other disease area. But I think what I'm now calling high-level behaviors, right? So if it's malaria, for example, it's a health issue, it's a well-being issue. What's that mindset change? What's that mental model that you will be able to impart and hopefully can help with any other programming that may come later without necessarily using behavioral science experts externally to come in and rebuild capacity on different disease areas. So that to me seems to be at least one promising approach. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Miguel?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Just going back to your first question and then I'll answer the second one, because I see that there are a lot of people from Latin America and probably are waiting for this. So I'm not speaking on behalf of BIT, but I'm speaking personally here. And I think in terms of the impact of recent political changes, it's complicated first to estimate the impact because we are unsure what's like the situation or the scenario will be like in the next months, right? But of course, it has created some impasse in new initiatives. Of course, some countries received a lot of funding coming from the US, and of course that affects those initiatives. But I have to say that we come, all of us, from regions that we have to be flexible and adapt to circumstances. So I'm seeing also that we are trying to find other ways of funding, other ways to use resources. And also, I think we are very efficient on how we use and spend our resources. So that's one thing that I'm seeing in the region. In terms of behavioral units in the region that we have helped develop, I think that's a very interesting question. We have really successful experiences with Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. And what we've done there is basically advise them on a very specific project, and they work with us. They learn by doing, and we give advice on how they, on the process that we use, on the frameworks that we use. And after that, they are able to finish one trial or two, and then we continue giving them some advice. I know an important factor there is to have a champion that leadership would support you. And for us to keep this going through all our different administrations, it's important to show the unit at something more technical than political. So when you have different administrations, that does not compromise the unit. That will be everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just moving along, I'd like to hear a little bit more about some of the challenges that you all are encountering, across your regions and across projects and so forth, and maybe some of the strategies to overcome them, and my hunch is that some of these will be commonalities that we'll be hearing across the world and are maybe common to me in London and New York, while perhaps others are more specific to your region or situation. Miguel, are you okay to lead us off on this, and then others will talk?
Of course.
Sure.
Well, thank you, Scott. I thought about this, and I think I have three main topics. And of course, the main one would be the scarcity of resources, right? And many our institutions lack budget, but not also that, also time, staff, and to experiment or adapt new tools like behavioral science. Also, some of them work in very restricted environments. Some of them, of course, as I mentioned, are super efficient with the resources they have. So in that sense, what we've done at BIT first is to develop interventions that are cost-effective in use of technology. We've used chatbots. Also, for example, we use WhatsApp for some interventions, or also use social media ads to run A/B testing, and of course, AI to maybe reduce some costs in some of these stages of the projects. We've also developed an online experimentation platform, Predictive. We've run a few experiments in the region that have been pretty successful and also pretty cost effective. So that's also one way that we've addressed those challenges. And the other one, I think this one is very interesting, is that we have also worked to develop local capacity. As we've mentioned, we train public servants or mentor local teams so they can do a lot of that work, and also to not be the ones like being the bottleneck of applying behavioral science in the region. The second one the second main barrier that we've seen, I think this has changed a little bit over the years, but there has been a mismatch between the behavioral science evidence base and the local context. Some people are still skeptical about some of this evidence because, of course, some of it come from high-income countries, and they ask like a very valid question like, hey, will this actually work here? And of course, this is a fair question, and we have to address that. So what we've done, of course, is co-designing interventions with local partners, and that will help us ensure cultural but also institutional fit, and creates also ownership, and which is crucial for continuity. And in case where we have seen institutions that have, for example, like have enough budget to do that, of course, testing it's very important. And I think one example of that is tax interventions. We've run a few in Mexico, Guatemala, and I also know Brazil did the same interventions about like sending social norm tax messages. And that was a very important experiment for us at BIT, because if you, for example, read how David Halper book about the nudge unit, you will see that that was the experiment that helped us stay alive. And what these other countries did is to adapt that experiment to their own context. And what they found was very positive effects, for example, and very important is other alternative messages that they crafted also worked better, and none of them backfired. Same happened to COVID-19 messages. We did that also in the US, but also in Colombia. So that's one thing that we've done. And the last and main barrier that we've seen in our region, of course, is political turnover. In many countries in the region, when leadership changes, priorities also shift quickly. And of course, this affects continuity and institutional memory. And we have seen that, for example, some behavioral science units or projects that we are making great progress suddenly lose momentum because the administration changed or the champion simply left the institution. In these cases, right, these are a little bit difficult because they don't depend on us. But fortunately, we've seen that that has changed all over the years since and now behavioral science or application of behavioral science is seen more as a tool that not only applies to one administration. So that will be the three main barriers that I see. So
Rookie mistake, I muted myself. I said, thanks so much for the detail there. I did see one question come up as you were speaking about where people might be able to find some of the documents or perhaps case studies tied to the projects, in South America or in Latin America. Is there a place that you might point people to for some of those cases?
Our website, bi.team, you will find lots of information, especially in our blog section. We publish a lot of what we do, all the results, and you will find a lot of information. Also, reach out directly to us. You will see our names there, and we will be happy to share and talk about that.
Great, thank you. Francis or Pooja, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the challenges that you're facing, and in particular, maybe cases where you could share a strategy that you've been able to apply to help overcome some of those challenges. Francis, are you okay to share anything on this one?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Happy to jump in. And Miguel, thanks for laying it out comprehensively. I think you covered most of what I would have added. But very quickly, first on any resources for the question that was asked, I'm happy to share with you, Scott, and if you have any follow-up email, I find it very easily. Behavioral Principle 101, make it easy for people to find what you want. And yes, please check our website and do things. I think one barrier definitely is folks seeing behavioral science as a luxury, right? Something that you add on at the end of a program design, not something embedded from the beginning. And I think that's really problematic because it's only coming in, behavioral science only comes into the forefront as this is a problem, this is a solution. But I think really understanding human behavior is more interesting or more valuable than that, right? Being able to re-articulate certain challenges from a behavioral point of view and say, these are now the opportunities, right? And then other people being able to understand that and start crowding in and offer their own solutions to it would be something that I think is an example that I've seen that has worked before. So not just slapping on behavioral science at the end, which I think has been a big challenge where folks need to approach it from a really foundational point of view. The other one that I would add is perhaps a mismatch between insight generation and so the evidence to move forward in perspective may not truly reflect some of the local realities that we have, right? And so if you can imagine a research process, data collectors who, however well trained they are, if we disassociate them from the data analysis and insight generation, insight validation, and kind of the dissemination efforts that we have, and really think through feedback loops within the ecosystems that we all care about, then perhaps some of the things we're sharing become irrelevant. So, for example, for us, we are pioneering this new model of citizen ethnography, and it's meant to do exactly that. Can we bridge the gap between data collection and data analysis, right? Because if we're trying to serve communities, why not make sure they're fully embedded in what we're doing? So those are two barriers and hopefully ways in which we're trying to approach them that I'd like to share. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Francis. Pooja, happy to turn to you, but okay, yeah, please jump in and then I'll ask you another question.
3 points, because I know we're also running short. So firstly, I agree with everything that has been said about resource constraints and so on, but I just wanted to add 3 things. One is a specific problem that we find in India is that behavior science, when we talk to the government, it's only understood as communication material. So I think one of the things that we've had to work is to say that behavior science is much broader than just communication. And so that's something by working with them, we are trying to build that, the appetite for something beyond just communication. The second is, I would say that there are many constraints on the type of interventions that we can try. And so, as behavior scientists, we want to come up with like the most innovative thing and we want to do the perfect solution. But I think it's been a learning for us that how much the practicality needs to play a role, including in how we even talk about some of these interventions. For example, the word experimentation, that is not taken that nicely by the government, because that's not their job. Their job is not experimentation. So how do you even talk about things that you are doing? That's something to think about. And then the last thing I would say is that scalability sometimes becomes an issue, because in India we have many states, and so what happens is that every state wants to generate evidence again. Because India is also not just one country, so that's a big problem, that we have to sometimes keep regenerating evidence in different states. Hopefully, over a period of time, we'd be able to show patterns and say that it's not that different. But I think that's a problem that we very specifically face of repeated evidence generation, just because the state is different or the context is different.
Yeah. No, thank you. And many of those points resonate with my experience, which more private sector and business, but the idea that if it's not in my city or my place or my thing, we need to reinvent and start from scratch. And then as well, the idea of folks taking a very narrow view based on the first experiment or the first project they do. They think very narrowly that it's only about communications or it's only about nudging in a certain way, rather than a broader perspective. Pooja, while I have you, I would love to hear a little more about private sector. I know sometimes when we speak about Global South or some of these regions, that we kind of default to government or development issues. But I was curious your take on business adoption and what you've been seeing and where that's heading.
Yeah, so I think I made some of these points that I think in India, there is a lot of energy in the private sector to use behavior science, but it is restricted to the digital businesses. Now, digital businesses and that whole ecosystem is seeing a massive growth. And that's where, and that's also something that we see in global north. So it's not that different in the sense that digital businesses are the first to adopt, because it's easier to collect data, it's easier to experiment, it's easier to implement things on a digital platform. So, that's the businesses. So whether it's fintech or health tech or e-commerce, that's where we are seeing the most excitement. And the applications are quite similar to what you would see in a UK or a US. It is around consumer engagement, retention, UI, UX design, communication, and so on and so forth. So we worked with, companies, saving companies, fintech companies who want to create a goal-based saving product, or we worked with, I worked with PNG when they wanted to improve their Amazon display, worked with a logistics company which had, manages trucks on how to keep their drivers on the app. So I think the applications are similar. I think what's really different is that we are working, as I said, with a population where literacy and digital confidence is very low, but presence is very high. And so the UI, UX and all the principles that work in the global north, they don't translate well. And here, for example, instead of text, we need visuals, we need voice. And so there's a lot of rethinking, a lot of innovation there on how do we do this, these digital innovations, but in an environment that is, that is in India, which is with low literacy and low digital confidence. There are three issues that I also wanted to put on the table that I find the private sector companies face. One is, whose job is it? Because private sector companies they don't have a behavior science team sitting there. They have a design team and a product team and a marketing team and a data analytics team. So that's one issue, that, who takes the lead and how does the interdepartmental communication happen? So that's something that can be a problem. The other thing is that there is often this thing that one intervention should lead to like an immediate and a large impact. And I think that's a little bit of legacy from the world of marketing. So there's, and if the first or the second experiment doesn't work, then people may just give up on it. So there is this thing that we need, that pipeline mindset still needs to be built, which is that, yeah, you need 25,000 experiments to make a business, a substantial dent, to your business results. So that's another problem. And the last I would say is that there is impatience that you want to see the results now. But a lot of these businesses are too involved in the operation side, and there is no capacity to do anything on top of it. So there is this need to build some dedicated capacity which can actually do it. This is seen something as an add-on, a good to have, maybe on the top, but it's not core to the business. And so therefore, sometimes organizations don't have capacity. So those are some of the challenges in the private sector as well.
Thank you. That was a lot there in a very limited time. Very well done. Miguel or Francis, would you either of you like to comment quickly about the private sector or businesses and what you're seeing and how that may align or maybe be different from some of what Pooja just shared?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Right before that, make a point. Okay, can you hear me, Scott?
Yes, sorry, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Earlier, Pooja at this point on, different states really wanting to validate whatever approaches or findings people would have, which I think is very important. For me, it definitely has a trade-off between precision in really hyper-localized contexts and then prescription in what's generalizable, and then how do we sort of move forward from that, right? And I think we need to figure out how to balance that trade-off. And, if you can imagine it's an individual, you don't go to the hospital and get the whole battery of tests. You have a test that sort of indicates what the challenge would be, and then people know how to prescribe all the diagnosis and prognosis is. So just wanted to lay that. On the private sector, I don't actually think private sector is waiting for development to sort of invite them in any way. I think private sector, as long as there is a market opportunity and they'll make a return, they will be able to jump in. And I think this has been happening for a while. So part of what I had mentioned earlier was being able to articulate this market opportunity of a credit market space within Kenya without offering collateral. And there were so many private entities that just jumped in to try and figure this issue out at a medium, micro, small enterprise level, but also at an individual level. And they became a headache for a central bank just offering predatory lending rates that was meant to have been fixed, say, by a development bank in one way or the other. So I think private sector has such a huge role to play, and there'll definitely know when for us development folks to invite them in. And as long as we keep articulating what market opportunities may exist, they will absolutely try and crowd us out, if I could even say that. Thanks.
Great. I know we're running right towards the end of time, so I think I'd like to just pose maybe one question to each of the three of you as we wrap things up. And to some degree, I think it's looking ahead to the future of the field. What you would say, where you'd like or perhaps anticipate the field to be 10 years out from now. And I guess perhaps linked to that, if you were able, I saw several questions here about kind of entering the field or advice to younger people looking to get into the field. So I think anything you might have to share that might help them in terms of where to start or where you see opportunities would be great as well. Miguel, are you okay to start us off on kind of this looking forward and maybe any advice to people?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Scott. First, where I see the field in the next 10, 15 years is that behavioral science is applied as a tool, as a lens. Also, that I see more behavioral units within organizations. That's something that I see in the next 10 years. And of course, something that we will develop more local evidence, more local knowledge solutions. In terms of advice for people that want to or looking to enter the field, I would say come to this type of events. Thank you so much for Bescy to have this. Also reach out to people, take the risk. You never know. Most of them actually answer. I try to learn as much as possible about the field. As I mentioned, you should look at our blog posts, also Busara's or Ashoka's ones, and see and try to learn as much as possible about the field.
Thank you. Pooja, can you go next?
2 points on the future. So I think as as digital technologies like AI, machine learning, big data, they're continuing to evolve. I think behavior science will increasingly merge with these fields. I mean, frankly, already we're all using AI for issue diagnosis, for research, for literature review, for designs. And now we're, working on AI-driven nudges and personalized invention. So I think the integration of the two fields is likely to happen. And I think that in terms of application, climate action, whether it's, mitigation right now, but adaptation, resilience, I think that is a topic and its intersection with behavior science. I think that's, going to become big. It already is, and it's only going to become bigger. In terms of advice, I agree with everything that Miguel has said, but I would also add two things that, behavior science is now, I mean, there's so many disciplines that are involved, there's psychology, economics, design, AI technology. So I think we need exposure. So people who are interested in this field need exposure to many of these different fields. And not be just narrowly, doing only have exposure to behavior science, quote unquote. I think all these fields. And then I also think that capability in research methods is still of value. So whether it's qual research, experimental design, both in tech and non-tech environment, I think those are skills which are still in short supply, especially in India. So those would be, my advice to people who want to get into this field.
Great, thank you. And then finally, Francis.
Thanks. Yeah, very quickly, I'd say it's a great field. It's a great time to be in it. Definitely learn the science and the nitty-gritty, but also build the muscle to listen. I think behavioral science in the global south particularly won't necessarily be about really exploring tools or exploring them or kind of knowledge generation. It'll be focused more on knowledge use and how do you co-create meaning? How do you solve the right problems? How do you respect the complex world we all live in? I think it'll be more embedded. It won't necessarily be from top programs where it'll be across different fields. I think it'll be behavioral scientists will be more community organizers, perhaps public servants, teachers trained in some of those behavioral principles, and those will be the ones that are more relevant to our field. So, yeah, that'll be my take. Thank you. Good luck. Reach out if you ever need listening ear. Thanks.
Great. Well, I know we're right at the top of the hour, so I don't want to take much more of people's time. But first and foremost, I really want to thank Miguel, Pooja, Francis, Ammaarah, who was with us earlier, and certainly Grace, all of you for being part of this and making this happen. As usual, we have a lot more content than time, but everyone who has registered and all of you who are on today, you will see an email from us probably in the next few days, which will also include a link to the recording so you can go back. And we'll also include some contact information and most likely some information that will point you towards the upcoming events around Global South. You see the Bescy link as well. You can learn about how to volunteer. You can also learn about upcoming events through that. We will have another event of this practitioners network coming up on June 18th. So you'll look out for that, I hope. And many of you, I hope, will join us. And for the 3 or 4 people who are from Philadelphia that I saw, we actually have an event going on there on Monday night. So you can find that or reach out to me if you can't find the information and the link to that. So I'll sign off. And again, thanks so much for everyone. I know we just touched on things, but again, today is meant as a beginning, not by any means an end. And I really hope to see many of you involved in Bessy's continuing efforts and increasing efforts around a lot of these issues and regions that we've been talking about today. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and take care. Be well. Bye.
Thank you.